The forest was quiet, too quiet for a place that was once full of birds and life. Jace stepped carefully through the broken trees, his boots crunching dead leaves underfoot. The sky above was cloudy, the sun hidden behind gray clouds. He had followed a strange signal on his old scanner, something not from Earth. It led him to this forgotten place, deep beyond the borders of the human zone. He stopped near a giant tree with glowing roots. There was something there, something breathing. He could hear the soft sound of whimpers, like someone crying. Not an animal, not a machine. It sounded scared. Jace moved slowly, brushing aside thick vines. Behind the roots, inside a small pit, he saw her, a girl, but not human. She was thin, her skin a soft violet color, her hair silver and tangled, chains wrapped around her wrists. Glowing slightly with blue lights, her eyes were wide, glowing faintly as she looked up at him. She tried to speak but only gasped, her lips dry. Jace knelt down and whispered, "It's okay, I'm not here to hurt you." Of course, she didn't understand his words, but she stared at him with fear and a small spark of hope. Before he could reach the chains, a sound came from behind, a sharp clicking. Metal against metal. Jace froze, turning his head slowly. 3 tall creatures stood at the edge of the trees. Alien hunters, armor black as oil, long rifles in their hands. They scanned the area, their eyes glowing red behind helmets. The girl closed her eyes in terror, trying to become invisible. Jace didn't know why he cared so much, but he felt it. In his chest, he had to help her. He looked around quickly and spotted a slope nearby. "Come on," he whispered, pulling a small tool from his belt. He sliced the chains with a quick flash of light. She fell forward into his arms, weak and trembling. He lifted her and moved toward the slope. Hidden by thick leaves, the hunters were getting closer. One of them paused and turned his head sharply. Jace ducked, holding the girl tightly. He moved silently down the slope, careful not to make a sound. At the bottom was an old maintenance hatch, rusted, but half open. Jace pulled her through and closed it gently behind them. Inside it was dark and smelled of dust and oil. The girl coughed, her thin shoulders shaking. Jace took off his jacket and wrapped it around her. She looked at him, confused but no longer afraid. He opened a small bottle of water and held it to her lips. She drank slowly, her hands shaking. "Who are you?" Jace asked softly. Of course, she didn't answer, but her eyes searched his face as if trying to read his soul. He pulled out a small flashlight and looked around. The place was an old ruin, part of a research base from long ago. Perfect for hiding, at least for now. Outside, he could hear the faint hum of the hunter's tech. They were scanning the forest, moving closer to the hatch. Jace held his breath, reaching for the old power console. He activated a cloaking field barely working, but it would hide their heat signatures. The girl watched him, surprised, as if she had never seen a human act like this. Jace gave her a tired smile. "We'll be okay," he said. She touched her chest and then pointed to herself. Lyra, she whispered weakly. It was the first word she had spoken. Jace nodded. "Lyra." "I'm Jace." Just then, a red light blinked above. He looked up and his stomach dropped. A drone floated silently above the hatch, its lens focusing. It had found them. He turned to Lyra, his voice low and urgent. "We have to move now." She stood, still weak, but holding onto his shoulder. Together, they slipped deeper into the shadows. As the hum of the drone grew louder, the tunnel was cold and narrow, barely wide enough for them to move. Jace held the flashlight in one hand and Lyra's hand in the other. She stumbled a few times but didn't let go. Behind them, the sound of the drone faded, but Jace knew more would come. They had to keep going. Deeper into the ruins, every corner they turned felt the same broken pipes, cracked walls, and flickering lights. It smelled like old oil and dust, a place long forgotten by everyone. But Jace remembered this place from an old map. It used to be part of a supply station during the early colonization days. Now, it was their only hope. Lyra stayed silent most of the time. Her eyes moved quickly, taking in every detail. Even weak, she seemed alert, like someone trained to survive. Jace wondered what kind of life she had before the chains. What kind of people would hunt a girl like her? He stopped at a half-broken panel and began to work. A few sparks flew as he rerouted power. The wall creaked open to reveal a narrow room filled with old crates. Jace led Lyra inside and closed the door behind them. "Safe," he whispered. Though he wasn't sure if it was true, Lyra sat on the floor, her breathing slow and shallow. Jace knelt beside her and gave her another sip of water. "Why were they chasing you?" he asked softly. She looked down, eyes full of pain, then touched the glowing collar around her neck. It was not just a tracker. It was something more. Jace leaned closer, studying it. Alien tech, not like anything humans used. He didn't dare pull it off without knowing what it might trigger. Lyra pointed at the crates and made a small gesture. Jace opened one and found an old translator device. It took a minute to charge, but when he held it out, she placed her hand over his. A soft light blinked, and the device activated. Her voice came through the static, shaky but clear. "Slave. I was taken for blood," she said. Jace froze, staring at her. "Blood?" he asked, confused. She nodded slowly. "My kind. Rare. We heal. We fuel. Machines, even weapons." Jace's heart pounded. She wasn't just a prisoner, she was being used like a battery. Suddenly, the wall trembled slightly. Jace stood and pulled out a motion scanner from his pack. A red dot appeared, then two more. "They're here," he muttered. Lyra struggled to stand. "No fight," she said, her voice shaking. Jace shook his head. "We're not going to fight." He looked at a second exit on the scanner, a maintenance shaft. Jace pulled her close, wrapped a thin cloak around her, and opened the hatch. It led into a shaft just big enough to crawl through. One wrong move and it would collapse, but they had no choice. Lyra crawled ahead of him, her breathing heavy. Jace followed, his arms sore, every movement slow and careful. Behind them, voices echoed deep, mechanical and close. Lyra suddenly stopped, frozen. Jace whispered, "What is it?" She pointed forward. Light was pouring in, but something moved across it. A shape, too big for the tunnel, waiting at the exit. Jace pulled her back slowly and leaned into a side panel. It creaked open into a side chamber, filled with strange machines and empty pods. Lyra collapsed onto the floor, eyes wide with fear. "We're trapped," she said. Jace looked around quickly, then saw a console with faded human writing. He powered it up, barely working, but enough. The console showed a map of the tunnels and an emergency lift nearby. It was risky, old, probably unstable, but it was their only way out. He turned to Lyra, took her hand and said, "Trust me." She stared at him, then nodded slowly. Together, they moved toward the lift, every step echoing in the silence. Just before they reached it, the floor behind them exploded. Hunters burst through, weapons aimed. Jace threw a smoke device and pushed Lyra into the lift. He jumped in after her and slammed the switch. The lift shook, sparks flew, and the whole tunnel roared with falling debris. The last thing Jace saw before the doors shut was a red-eyed hunter stepping through the smoke. As the lift rose, Lyra grabbed his arm tightly. "You are strange," she whispered. Jace laughed breathlessly. "You're not the first to say that." When the lift stopped, they were inside an old tower hidden by the forest. The sky was dark, the wind cold, but for a moment, they were safe. Jace sat down beside her, heart still pounding. Lyra looked at him, her voice soft. "You could have left me." He looked back at her, tired but calm. "I didn't want to." Outside, a drone hovered again in the distance, but this time, Jace and Lyra were ready. The wind howled through the cracks of the old tower. Dust floated in the air as Jace and Lyra leaned against the cold wall. Neither of them spoke for a while, their breathing slow and shaky. Outside, the drone's red eye blinked softly in the dark sky, then vanished into the clouds, but they both knew it would be back. And next time, it wouldn't come alone. Jace stood up and stretched his arms, his body sore from crawling and running. Lyra sat quietly, her silver hair falling over her tired eyes. Even in silence, she looked like she was holding back a storm. There was something hidden inside her, something powerful. He had seen it once already, just for a second, when she stared down the hunters in the tunnels. Jace checked the broken equipment left behind in the tower. He found an old fusion battery and a data console that still hummed with weak power. Maybe he could find a way to contact someone, but he knew calling anyone meant risking her capture. Too many humans worked for the bounty. Lyra watched him from the corner, her voice soft and low. "You should leave me." Jace turned to her, frowning. "Why would I do that?" he asked. She looked away. "Because they will never stop hunting me." He walked over, sat beside her, and gave a tired smile. "Then we won't stop running." Suddenly the ground shook. It was faint at first, then stronger, like a pulse. Deep underground, Lyra's head snapped toward the sound, her eyes glowing slightly. She whispered something in her own language, something Jace didn't understand. Then she stood quickly. "We must go now." Before Jace could ask why, the floor beneath them cracked. A piece of the old wall slid open, not from force but from some kind of energy signal. Lyra stepped forward, drawn to it like a magnet. "What is this?" Jace asked, following her. She stared into the darkness, her face pale. "A memory," she said. "A place I was taken to. Long ago." The hidden room was cold and clean, untouched by time. Blue lights lined the walls, and strange symbols flickered on glass panels. Jace looked around in awe. "This isn't human," Lyra nodded. Slowly, "No. It belongs to my people." In the center of the room stood a tall device, shaped like a flower made of light and crystal. Lyra approached it and placed her hand on the glowing stem. The machine responded instantly, opening like a blooming rose. Inside, a floating hologram appeared, an image of her, younger, shackled and afraid. Jace's heart twisted as he watched the recording. She had been taken as a child, experimented on, drained like a living battery. Her voice echoed through the chamber, repeating the words over and over. "I will not break. I will not break." The recording ended, and Lyra stepped back, shaking. She looked at Jace with red eyes full of pain. "This is why they want me," she said. "I was born with something rare, something they fear and want to control." Jace reached out and gently held her hand. "I don't care what they want," he said. "They can't have you." The room suddenly went dark. A loud hum filled the air, and metal doors slammed shut behind them. Jace pulled his flashlight, but the light flickered. "We're locked in," he muttered. Lyra closed her eyes, trying to focus, but the room was built to suppress her abilities. "It's a trap," she whispered. "This place wasn't just for memories. It was a cage." From the far side of the room, another door opened slowly. Out stepped a tall figure, cloaked in shadow, his face hidden by a metal mask. Lyra took a step back, her voice trembling. "Krell." The figure spoke in a deep voice, sharp like a blade. "Run all you like, little exile, but you always return to me." Jace stepped between them. "She's not yours." Krell tilted his head, amused. "You're the human? The one playing hero?" Without warning, Krell raised his hand, and the machine behind him came alive. Energy beams shot out, targeting Lyra. Jace jumped in front of her, the beam slicing across his side. He fell, gasping, the pain sharp and burning. Lyra screamed and rushed to him, holding him close. His blood stained her hands, hot and real. She looked up, eyes glowing brighter than ever. Something inside her snapped. The walls began to shake. The machines flickered and sparked. Lyra stood, her voice calm and filled with fire. "You hurt him," she said. "Now you will learn fear." Krell stepped back, surprised. Before he could speak, a wave of energy blasted from Lyra's body. The machines shattered, the glass cracked, and Krell was thrown across the room. She ran to Jace and lifted him gently. His eyes fluttered open. weak but still holding a smile. "You're amazing," he whispered. She held him tighter, her voice soft. "You saved me first." As the tower crumbled around them, Lyra carried Jace through a burst-open wall into the trees beyond. Behind them, the ruins burned with light, and the hunters were left searching shadows. But they were already gone, deeper into the wild, together, *. The stars above the forest were brighter than ever, but Lyra didn't look up. She held Jace close as she walked, her steps slow and careful. His blood had dried along her arms, but she didn't care. Each breath he took reminded her he was still alive, still with her, far from the ruined tower, far from Krell's machines. The forest opened into an old human camp, long abandoned, half covered in vines. Lyra found shelter inside a metal cabin with broken walls and a dusty cot. She laid Jace down, his face pale, his breathing soft. Then she sat beside him, watching his chest rise and fall. In that quiet moment, something inside her began to change. She had never cared for anyone before, not like this. Jace had touched a part of her that even she didn't know was still alive. He groaned in his sleep, turning slightly. Lyra touched his face gently and whispered his name. To her surprise, he opened his eyes, just a little. "You stayed," he said, voice dry and weak. "Of course I stayed," she replied, blinking. "Fast, you foolish human, you bleed too much." He laughed softly, then coughed. She gave him a few sips of water and leaned close. "There's an old medical kit here," she said. "I'll try to fix you." Jace nodded faintly. "Just don't let me die before you tell me why they're afraid of you." Lyra hesitated, then stood. Walking to a cracked mirror on the wall, she stared at her reflection, touched the collar still locked around her neck, then slowly turned to him, her voice quiet. "They fear me because I carry something ancient in my blood." She walked closer, her eyes glowing a soft silver. "Power left behind by those who created my people. The first ones, the original makers of stars." Jace raised an eyebrow. "You're a princess with god blood?" Lyra blinked, then laughed for the first time. It was small, but real. "Something like that," she said. "But it's not a gift, Jace. It's a curse. Everyone who wants it tries to break me." She knelt beside him and began patching the wound with old bandages and skin glue. Her hands were gentle, but her mind raced. They had maybe a few hours before Krell tracked them again. He always found her. Jace winced as the bandage tightened, but kept looking at her. "You didn't break," he whispered. "I saw you back there. You were like a star exploding." Lyra looked at him with wide eyes, then looked down, her voice barely a whisper. "I was afraid. Afraid you'd die." Outside, the forest stirred, not with hunters this time, but with movement far above. A ship, silent and massive, passed through the clouds. Its lights blinked red and gold. Lyra saw it through the crack in the roof, and her heart sank. The Empire had arrived. Not just bounty hunters, not just Krell. They sent a warship. She woke Jace quickly, helped him sit up. "They found us again," she said. "But this time it's not a drone or a single soldier." He looked at her, still dizzy, but understanding. "We can't run forever," he said. "No," she agreed. "We need help." Jace thought for a moment, then gave her a weak grin. "There's a group out there. Not official military, but human enough. They help runaways and outcasts." Lyra narrowed her eyes. "You mean smugglers?" Jace smiled. "Friendly smugglers," with his arm over her shoulders. They made their way out of the shelter, moving under thick trees. The ship above didn't see them, not yet, but every step felt like walking on fire. Jace was slower now, the wound deeper than he admitted. Lyra kept glancing at him, fear growing behind her calm face. An hour passed before they reached the hidden edge of a deep ravine. Below it, flashing blue lights blinked near a landing pad. Old cargo ships, dirty and patched together, sat in silence. Lyra's eyes widened. "This place smells like rust and lies." Jace chuckled. "Welcome to the safe zone." A tall woman stepped out from behind a crate. Her coat full of wires and weapons, she looked human, mostly, but her eyes glowed with implants. "Jace," she said, arms crossed. "You're supposed to be dead." "Working on it," he replied, nearly falling over. Lyra stood in front of him quickly, hand glowing slightly. The woman raised her eyebrows. "And who's this shining alien girl?" Lyra looked the woman in the eyes, calm and proud. "I am the reason he's still breathing." There was a moment of silence, then the woman nodded. "I like her," she waved them in. "Come quick, the skies are about to get crowded." As they entered the hidden base, the clouds above began to break apart. A giant Empire ship slowly descended, engines rumbling like thunder. Inside the base, people moved fast, loading weapons, preparing ships, sealing doors. Lyra sat beside Jace as medics looked over his wound again. She took his hand and held it tight. He looked at her, eyes filled with pain and something else, trust. "I'd do it again, you know," he said. "I know," she whispered. Then she added softly, "But next time, I fight beside you." Outside, the Empire began scanning the planet. Inside, Jace and Lyra prepared for the battle neither of them could avoid. Jace woke to the sound of metal clanging and voices shouting in a language he didn't know. His vision was blurry, everything spinning. He reached out, but Lyra wasn't there. His wrists were tied, cold cuffs locking him to the chair. The room smelled of burning fuel and wet metal. It wasn't the base. It wasn't even Earth. A single overhead light buzzed above him, and the walls around were smooth and dark, like the inside of a machine. He tried to move, but pain shot through his side. They had taken him while he was unconscious. A sharp hiss broke the silence as a door slid open. Krell stepped in, calm and slow, his boots echoing across the floor. He removed his mask this time, revealing gray skin and sharp features. His eyes were hollow, empty of mercy. "You humans are always the same," he said, circling Jace. "You protect things that do not belong to you." Jace stayed silent, though every part of him wanted to curse. Krell leaned closer. "She's not yours." Jace gave a weak smile. "Maybe not. But she's not yours either." The first strike came fast, an electric baton across the ribs. Jace gasped but didn't cry out. Pain was something he could survive. But what scared him more was what they might be doing to Lyra, somewhere else. On the ship, Lyra stood quietly in a cargo hold filled with weapons and old machines. She had seen them take Jace. She had tried to reach him, but a gas bomb dropped at her feet. Now she was alone, surrounded by crates and red alarms. But she wasn't panicking, not this time. Lyra placed her hand on the collar still locked around her neck. Her eyes closed, and her breath slowed. Memories came like water. Her home, her people, the first time she was captured, the fear, the pain, the silence. But this time she wasn't silent. Her heart burned with one word: Jace. She opened her eyes, glowing brighter than ever. With a sharp motion, she slammed her hand against the collar, sending a surge of energy through it. The collar cracked, sparks flying across her skin. Then it shattered completely, the pieces falling to the floor. Every light in the hold flickered. Somewhere deeper in the ship, Krell stopped and looked up. He knew that energy. He hissed, "Too late." Jace was barely conscious when the alarms began to blare. Red lights flashed across the walls, and the ground shook beneath his chair. Krell turned toward the door, growling. Jace laughed softly. "You've made her angry." Before Krell could leave, the wall behind him exploded. Lyra stepped through, her body glowing like silver fire. She didn't speak, didn't scream. She raised her hand, and every weapon in the room froze midair. Their energy pulled away. Krell turned to face her, his own armor reacting with a flash of defense shields. "You think you can control it?" he shouted. "I don't need control," she replied. "I just need him back." In a flash, she moved faster than he could track. With one strike, she sent Krell crashing into the far wall. Jace watched in awe, barely able to stay awake. He whispered her name, and she turned to him instantly. With trembling hands, she broke his cuffs and caught him before he collapsed. "I've got you," she said softly. "You always do," he replied weakly, as she lifted him in her arms. Krell groaned and stood again, blood on his mouth. But this time, Lyra didn't wait. She looked at him one last time, eyes glowing cold. "I was afraid of you once," she said. "But now I remember who I am," with a wave of her hand. She sent a blast of pure force straight into him. He flew into the reactor wall, vanishing in the explosion that followed. Lyra ran with Jace through the smoke and fire. The ship breaking apart around them, she found a pod, old and barely working. She slammed the door shut and held Jace tight as she launched into space. The pod shook violently, burning through the atmosphere. But she didn't let go, not for a second. They crashed somewhere far, in the deep blue waters of a strange ocean. The pod floated, the emergency lights blinking red. Jace stirred, still breathing, still with her. Lyra looked out at the stars above and whispered, "No more running." "Not without a plan." She touched his face gently, then leaned back against the cold wall of the pod. She had saved him, yes, but now she had declared war. The pod floated like a broken shell on the endless ocean. Waves rocked it gently, but inside, nothing was calm. Lyra sat on the cold floor, her arms wrapped tightly around Jace's fading body. His skin was pale, his breathing shallow, and blood still seeped through the bandages. The stars above twinkled like silent watchers, offering no help. Lyra looked out through the cracked window, her thoughts spinning. She was far from any planet she knew, but one small signal blinked on the pod's console. A nearby moon inhabited, barely, with outposts and black market ports. It was dangerous. But she didn't hesitate. She rerouted power to the thrusters. The pod groaned in protest. "Just hold on," she whispered to Jace, her voice shaking. "I won't lose you." The engines coughed to life, and the pod turned, heading toward the only light in the dark. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. She had lost sense of time. The pod crashed into the dusty ground of a rust-colored moon. Smoke filled the air as she dragged the door open, carrying Jace on her back. She walked into a place where trust did not exist. Old ships sat like dead animals under the red sky, alien. Figures moved between metal huts, weapons always in hand. A creature with a face like glass stepped forward, his eyes scanning her. "No humans allowed," he growled. Lyra's hands sparked with energy, her voice low and deadly. "He's dying," she said. "And you will help," the creature laughed, until her eyes lit with power. Then he stepped aside, fast. Inside the scrap-built clinic, rusted machines beeped softly. The doctor, a three-armed alien with smoke in its mouth, glared at her. "No credits, no care," it said. Lyra raised her hand, and lightning crackled through the ceiling. "I will pay in fear if I must," she said. Jace was placed on the table, wires connected to his chest. His heartbeat was weak but steady. Lyra sat nearby, hands trembling now, her strength almost gone. She watched the machines work, but she didn't understand them. All she understood was the pain in her chest. When he stopped moving, even for a second, the doctor muttered something in its own language, then turned to her. "He'll live," it said, "but he needs rest." Lyra didn't speak, only nodded, her eyes never leaving Jace's face. Days passed in silence. She stayed at his side, never sleeping, barely eating. She didn't let anyone near him, not even to clean the room. The others in the outpost whispered about her. The glowing girl with human blood on her hands. On the third day, Jace opened his eyes. At first, he couldn't speak. Then he saw her, and a weak smile spread across his face. "You look awful," he said. Lyra laughed, tears finally slipping down her cheeks. "So do you." He reached out, and she held his hand. For a moment, the world outside the walls disappeared. Jace whispered, "You came for me." Lyra nodded. "I would come again." He stared at her, eyes searching hers. "Why?" She hesitated, then answered softly, "Because I think I've forgotten how to live without you." The door burst open. a loud crash shaking the room. A young smuggler ran in, face pale. "You two need to leave now," he said quickly. "Empire scouts just landed outside." Lyra stood instantly, her energy already rising. Jace tried to sit up but groaned in pain. "No," she said gently. "You stay here." He grabbed her wrist, his eyes serious. "Don't fight alone again." Outside, the ground trembled. As two sleek ships landed, Empire soldiers in black armor began surrounding the outpost. But this time, Lyra didn't run. She stepped out into the open, her body glowing brighter with every breath. One soldier raised a scanner. "It's her," he said. "The living core." Blasters charged, but Lyra didn't flinch. She raised her hands. The air around her shimmering like heat. One step forward, and their weapons shorted out. Another step, and the soldiers dropped to their knees, unable to breathe, inside the clinic. Jace forced himself to stand, leaning on the wall. He watched. Through the window, pain in his body, pride in his heart. The outpost stood still as the Empire forces retreated in panic. Lyra stood tall in the dust, a silent storm wrapped in light. She turned back to the clinic, eyes locking with his. Later that night, as they rested in a safe room hidden below the port, Jace whispered, "They're afraid of you now." Lyra leaned against him, calm at last. "Good," she said. "Let them be, but what now?" he asked. She looked up at the stars through the cracked ceiling. "Now, we stop hiding." The stars were silent witnesses above the black sky. Jace stood at the edge of the cliff, his coat flapping in the wind. Behind him, the mountain base rumbled with life engineers, smugglers, fighters all moving with one purpose. They were readying for war, but Jace wasn't thinking about war. He was thinking about her. Lyra floated above the canyon, her body surrounded by a soft pulsing light. She had been training for days, letting her power grow, not hiding it anymore, not holding it back. Every time her feet touched the ground, the earth trembled slightly. She was no longer the hunted. She was something else now, something the Empire had feared for centuries, but failed to destroy. Jace walked up behind her, his side still wrapped, but his legs steady again. "You know they'll bring everything this time," he said. Lyra didn't turn, her voice calm. "Good," she replied. "Let them come." He smiled, but there was worry in his eyes. "What if we lose?" She turned to face him, her silver eyes glowing like twin moons. "Then we lose together." A warning light blinked in the sky. The Empire fleet had arrived. Massive ships like dark mountains fell from orbit, their engines screaming through the clouds. Soldiers dropped from carriers, thousands of them. Hover tanks rolled across the plains, forming a circle around the mountain base. Jace stepped onto the command platform, linking with the base's defense system. Smugglers, hackers, rogue AI, everyone was in position, but no one looked more ready than Lyra. She stood on the highest ledge, facing the army alone, her hair floating in the wind. For a moment, everything went quiet. Even the soldiers seemed to pause, unsure, afraid. Then the Empire commander stepped forward, voice booming from his mask. "Surrender the girl," he said, "and we will spare the humans." Lyra didn't move, didn't blink. Jace shouted back, "She's not yours to take." The commander raised his hand, and the first wave charged. The world exploded into fire and thunder. Guns roared, machines screamed. But Lyra lifted her hands, and the sky itself seemed to bend. Her power stretched across the battlefield like light through water. Energy shields shattered. Weapons melted in the soldiers' hands. Still, they came, wave after wave. Jace fought beside her, a rifle in his hands. But never far from her side, she didn't let anyone touch him. Every time danger neared, her power surged, forming a barrier he could not see but always felt. Together, they moved like one force. An Empire walker approached, 20 meters tall, its cannon glowing red. Lyra narrowed her eyes. She stepped forward and raised both hands. With a scream of metal and heat, she crushed the walker into dust before it could fire. The ground trembled under the weight of her will, but the battle was not over. Krell returned. His armor rebuilt, more monstrous than before. He landed in front of them, his eyes filled with hate. "This ends now," he growled. Jace raised his weapon, but Lyra touched his arm gently. "No," she said. "This is mine." She stepped toward Krell, her light dimming slightly, her voice soft. "You tried to control me, to use me, to break me." Krell laughed. "And I will again." Lyra smiled sadly. "No, you won't." She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The wind stopped, the noise faded. Then light exploded from her body, not wild, not violent, but pure. It wrapped around Krell like chains of starlight. He screamed, but it was not pain, it was fear. For the first time he felt powerless. Lyra floated above him, speaking in the ancient tongue of her people. Her voice echoed across the battlefield. Not just words, but memory, truth, pain, and strength. The soldiers fell to their knees, weapons lowered. They didn't understand the language, but they felt it. They knew what she was. A force that could not be owned. A heart that could not be broken. Jace walked to her side as Krell collapsed. Unconscious, the army began to retreat slowly. Confused, disarmed, defeated. No one gave the order, they just knew. The fight was over, hours later, as the sun returned and smoke cleared from the land. Jace and Lyra stood together on the same cliff where it began. She looked tired, but peaceful. He reached out and held her hand. "So," he said, "now what?" She looked up at the sky, the stars still shining. "Now," she whispered, "we build something new." And in that moment, with the world watching and the war behind them, she leaned her head against his shoulder, not as a weapon, not as a fugitive, but as someone who had finally found where she belonged.